The land was still, the air unmoving, and in that silence a young heart understood something terrible. Staying could mean losing everything. The heat pressed down like a weight, and beside him lay the one being he trusted protect him, now too weak to rise. Without words or understanding, he felt the truth settle in. Love alone would not be enough to save her this time. The sun hung low and unforgiving above the ravine, turning the air thick and breathless. Heat shimmered off the rocks in wavering sheets, and the silence felt heavy, as if the land itself were holding its breath. In the center of that stillness lay the white tiger, her body stretched unnaturally against the dust. Once, her coat would have caught the light like fresh snow. Now it was dull and clotted, pressed flat by exhaustion and time. Her cub circled her slowly, his small paws stirring faint clouds of grit. He nudged her shoulder with his nose, then her cheek, waiting for the familiar response that never came. She did not lift her head. Her sides rose and fell in shallow, uneven motions, each breath thinner than the last. The cub let out a soft sound, somewhere between a chirp and a cry, the noise young animals make when they do not yet understand fear, but feel it anyway. The world around them offered nothing. No water traced the ravine floor. No shade broke the open sky. Even the insects seemed to have retreated from the heat. The cub pressed his body against his mother's flank, feeling the faint warmth still there, clinging to it as if a small weight might somehow anchor her to life. He pawed at the ground beside her, scratching uselessly, searching for anything that could help. Hours passed without shape or measure. Hunger gnawed the cub's belly, but thirst burned worse, a sharp ache that made him swallow again and again. He stood on his hind legs, stretching, peering into the distance as though answers might appear if he looked hard enough. All he saw were rocks and sky, and the long slope of the ravine disappearing into nothing. He returned to her, licking her paw, then her face, grooming her the way she once groomed him. It was a habit born of comfort, of routine, of safety. But she did not stir. The cub's ears flattened, his tail curling close to his body. Something inside him shifted then, a quiet understanding that did not come from instinct but from loss. Staying meant waiting for the end. Staying meant silence forever. He stepped back and looked at her fully, memorizing her shape, her scent, the slow rhythm of her breathing. The wind lifted for a moment, carrying the smell of dust and dry grass, and he lifted his head into it, tasting the air. Somewhere beyond this place, there had to be water. Somewhere, there had to be movement, life, something different from the stillness that pressed so hard it hurt. The cub moved closer one last time, pressing his forehead gently against hers. It was not a farewell, he understood, only a gesture of connection, of belonging. Then he turned away. Each step felt wrong, heavy, like his paws were sinking into the ground. He stopped twice, glancing back, his body tense, torn between fear and duty. When he finally began to walk, it was slow and uncertain. The rocks were sharp beneath his pads, and the slope was steep, but he kept going. He did not run. This was not panic. It was resolve, fragile but real. Behind him, his mother remained where she was, breathing softly, unaware of the choice being made for her. As the cub climbed out of the ravine and into the open land beyond, the sun dipped lower, softening the harsh light. He was alone now in a way he had never been before. Yet each step carried a quiet purpose. Leaving was not an act of abandonment. It was the only act of love he had left to give. The cub moved forward on instinct more than strength, his small body driven by something he did not yet have words for. The land changed gradually as he walked, the open wilderness giving way to paved roads, sharp smells, and unfamiliar sounds. His paws, made for soft earth and grass, slipped on concrete and burned with every step. Hunger pressed hard against his ribs, and thirst coated his tongue, but he kept moving. The memory of stillness behind him was heavier than the pain ahead, and it urged him onward. By the time he reached the edges of human life, he no longer looked like a creature of grace. Dust clung to his coat, dulling its pale color, and his legs trembled beneath him. Cars passed too quickly, their noise sharp and frightening. People moved in clusters, talking, laughing, carrying bags and cups, their lives full and fast. The cub watched them from the curb, his ears twitching at every sound. These were the beings he sensed had changed things, though he did not know how. He approached slowly, carefully, lowering his head as he had learned to do with his mother. A group of people noticed him then, their voices rising in alarm. Someone shouted. Another stepped back sharply. The cub froze, confused by the sudden tension in the air. He let out a small, uncertain sound, more question than warning. The response came quickly and without understanding. A splash of cold water struck his side, soaking his fur and shocking his overheated body. He stumbled backward, heart racing. Unable to understand why reaching out had brought pain, he ran after that, not far, but enough to put distance between himself and the noise. His breathing came in short bursts as he ducked into a quieter street lined with trees and low houses. In 1 yard, children were playing, their laughter floating freely. The sound stopped the cub in his tracks. He stepped closer, drawn by something familiar in the movement, in the careless joy. For a brief moment, he forgot his fear. He darted forward and nudged a bright ball with his nose, tail flicking in hesitant hope. The reaction was instant and sharp. An adult shouted, grabbing a child and pulling them back. A plastic bottle flew through the air and struck the ground near the cub's paws. He flinched hard, flattening himself low, his body folding inward as if trying to disappear. The laughter was gone. Doors slammed. Windows closed. The cub was alone again, the space around him suddenly empty and cold. He sat there for a long moment, chest heaving, the lesson sinking in without words. As evening approached, the cub's strength thinned to something fragile. His steps slowed, and his head hung low. That was when he noticed a quiet figure standing beside a parked vehicle, uniform and tired, eyes soft with the weight of a long day. The cub hesitated at the edge of the light, fear pulling him back, need pushing him forward. The man did not shout. He did not move suddenly. He simply looked, really looked at the small, trembling animal before him, and in that pause, something shifted. The cub did not rush forward or retreat when the officer met his eyes. He stood still, breathing lightly, his body tense but open. There was no growl, no raised fur, only a quiet presence that asked to be noticed. The officer lowered himself slightly, keeping his movements slow, careful not to startle. Years of training had taught him to read situations quickly, but this was different. This was not danger. This was need, raw and unmistakable. The cub took a few steps away, then paused and looked back, his pale eyes steady. He repeated the motion again, a short distance farther this time, stopping to wait. The officer hesitated only a moment before following, his boots crunching softly on the ground. With each step, a fragile trust took shape, not spoken, not promised, but felt. The cub led him past the edge of the street and onto a rough dirt road, then farther still, away from the lights and sounds of the town. The drive that followed was quiet and focused. The cub rode curled on the seat, alert but calm, lifting his head whenever the vehicle slowed, watching the road ahead as if guiding by instinct. When the officer stopped at the edge of the ravine, the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. They descended together, the officer steadying himself against loose stones, the cub moving with renewed urgency, his energy returning as a familiar landscape took shape. They found her where he had left her. The mother lay on her side, unmoving, her breathing barely visible. The officer knelt beside her, his professional calm tightening into urgency as he assessed the situation. He spoke softly, not knowing if she could hear, but needing to fill the silence with reassurance. Tools came out slowly, deliberately. Every movement mattered. The cub paced nearby, circling, stopping to nuzzle his mother's flank, his small sounds echoing faintly against the rock walls. When the obstruction was finally removed, the moment stretched thin. The officer checked her breathing, then again, his hands steady despite the pounding in his chest. A long second passed, then another, then her chest rose more deeply, a ragged breath pulling air back into her lungs. The cub froze, then pressed close, his body trembling as if holding himself together through will alone. Relief did not come all at once. It came carefully, in increments, as the situation shifted from crisis to fragile hope. Help arrived soon after, and the ravine filled with purposeful motion. The mother was lifted gently, secured and transported with care. The cub remained near, watching every action, his eyes following the humans who now move with intention rather than fear. At the veterinary facility, the pace slowed again. Fluids, monitoring, quiet voices. The cub was placed nearby, separated but never far, his gaze fixed on a rise and fall of his mother's chest. Days turned into weeks, and the sharp edges of the emergency softened into routine. Strength returned slowly, not as a miracle but as a process. The officer visited when he could, standing quietly, never demanding recognition. When the tigers were finally moved to sanctuary, the space felt open and alive, filled with grass, shade, and water. The mother walked again with confidence, and the cub followed close, his movements lighter now. On one visit, the cub recognized the officer immediately. He approached the fence and paused, then pressed his paws together briefly, a small, deliberate gesture of acknowledgement. The officer rested his hand against the barrier, smiling softly. Nearby, the mother lowered her head in calm acceptance. Nothing needed to be said. The moment held its own meaning, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful choice is simply to listen when someone asks for help.